Could you please bring me a glass of water? Those 9 simple words would shatter a family forever. But before I tell you about the moment that changed everything, let me paint you a picture of betrayal so profound, it'll make you question everything you know about family loyalty. My name is Vincent Carruthers, and at 68 years old, I thought I understood what family meant. I was wrong. Dead wrong. The fluorescent lights in Mercy General's cardiac wing buzzed with the kind of persistent hum that makes you question your sanity. I'd been staring at those lights for 3 days, my chest carved open and stitched back together like a broken toy that someone had attempted to repair. Heart surgery, triple bypass. The kind of medical procedure that makes you contemplate mortality while simultaneously grateful for modern medicine's ability to keep you breathing when your own heart decides it's done with the job. Dr. Martinez had been optimistic during discharge. "Mr. Carruthers, you're remarkably strong for someone who flatlined twice during surgery. But remember, recovery is a marathon, not a sprint. Take it easy for the next few weeks." Twice. I had died twice on that operating table, only to be dragged back to a world where my own daughter would soon make me wish they hadn't bothered. The drive home felt endless. Every pothole sent shockwaves through my surgical incision, reminding me that my body was still knitting itself back together. But there was something else nagging at me, something beyond physical pain. During my 3-day hospital stay, Delilah and her husband Jackson had visited exactly once, 37 minutes according to the wall clock I'd watched while they made awkward small talk and checked their phones. 37 minutes for the man who had sacrificed everything for their comfort. Our house, or rather what I had foolishly signed over to be their house, sat at the end of Sycamore Lane like a monument to my own stupidity. White colonial wraparound porch, the kind of American dream that real estate agents use in their advertisements. I had built this place with my own hands 43 years ago, back when calluses were badges of honor and a man's word meant something. Now, pulling into the driveway I had poured myself, I felt like a stranger visiting someone else's life. The front door opened before I could reach for my keys. Delilah appeared in the doorway, but something was wrong with her expression. Where I expected to see relief, concern, or even basic human warmth, there was only the practiced smile of someone going through the motions. "Dad, you're finally home." Her voice carried the right notes, but they felt hollow, like an actor who had forgotten their motivation. "How are you feeling?" "Tired," I admitted, stepping carefully over the threshold. The familiar smell of home, coffee, vanilla candles, the faint scent of Jackson's cologne, should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like entering enemy territory. Jackson emerged from the kitchen, beer in hand despite it being barely past noon. "Vince, welcome back, man. Surgery go okay?" Surgery go okay? As if I had been getting a haircut instead of having my chest cracked open to repair the organ that keeps me alive. "It went as well as could be expected," I replied, making my way slowly toward my favorite armchair. Every step felt like negotiating with gravity itself. The chair welcomed me like an old friend, its worn leather conforming to my body in ways that hospital furniture never could. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the relief wash over me. Home. Finally. That's when I made my first mistake. "Could you please bring me a glass of water?" The words came out naturally, spoken to the people who should have been most concerned about my well-being. I wasn't demanding. I wasn't expecting to be waited on hand and foot. I was simply asking the daughter I had raised and provided for to bring her recovering father a glass of water. The silence that followed stretched like a guitar string about to snap. When I opened my eyes, Delilah was staring at me with an expression I had never seen before. Cold. Calculating. Like she was looking at an insect that had crawled across her dinner plate. "Seriously?" The word came out sharp enough to cut glass. "I just got home from the hospital," I said, confused by her reaction. "I'm still recovering." "We're not your servants." 4 words. 23 letters. The complete destruction of everything I thought I knew about my relationship with my daughter. Jackson didn't even look up from the television, where some mindless game show was blaring its synthetic enthusiasm into our suddenly toxic living room. His silence spoke volumes. This wasn't his fight, his body language suggested, but he wasn't going to oppose it either. "We're not your servants," Delilah repeated, her voice gaining strength from my obvious shock. "Just because you had a medical procedure doesn't mean we're going to wait on you hand and foot." Medical procedure. As if the surgeon had removed a splinter instead of spending 6 hours rebuilding the pathways that keep blood flowing to my brain. I gripped the armrests of my chair, feeling a different kind of pain spread through my chest. This wasn't surgical trauma. This was something deeper, more fundamental. The pain of understanding that you've been living in a fantasy, that the people you love most in the world see you as nothing more than an inconvenience. "I asked for water," I said carefully, as if speaking to a dangerous animal. "I didn't ask you to rebuild the kitchen." "The kitchen's right there," Jackson finally spoke, gesturing vaguely without taking his eyes off the screen. "You've got legs." "You've got legs." True enough. I had legs. I also had a chest that had been surgically opened, ribs that had been spread apart, and a heart that had stopped beating twice in the past week. But apparently those details were less important than their convenience. I stood up slowly, each movement sending fresh waves of pain through my torso. The surgical site pulled and burned, but I refused to let them see how much it hurt. Pride, I suppose. Or maybe just the stubborn refusal to give them the satisfaction of knowing how badly their cruelty was affecting me. The journey to the kitchen felt like crossing a desert. 23 steps that I had taken thousands of times before, now transformed into an odyssey of physical and emotional endurance. Behind me, I could hear them resume their casual conversation, as if nothing had happened, as if they hadn't just shattered something fundamental between us. The glass trembled in my hand as I filled it from the tap. Water had never tasted so bitter, even though it came from the same well I had dug myself 30 years ago when we first moved to this property. When I turned around, they were both watching me with expressions that mixed boredom with barely concealed annoyance. My daughter, my own flesh and blood, looked at me like I was some unwelcome stranger who had wandered into her house without permission. And that's when the truth hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. This wasn't my house anymore. 6 years ago, I had made what I thought was the most loving decision of my life. The grief was still fresh from Margaret's funeral, my wife, my partner, my anchor in this world for 34 years. Cancer had taken her slowly, cruelly, giving us plenty of time to say goodbye, but never enough time to say everything that needed saying. The life insurance payout had been substantial. $425,000, accumulated through decades of responsible premium payments and Margaret's insistence that we always think about tomorrow. She had made me promise, during those final weeks when her voice was barely a whisper, that I would use that money to take care of our family. "Make sure Delilah has security," she had whispered one evening, her hand weightless in mine. "Make sure she never has to worry about having a home." I had kept that promise in the most generous way I could imagine. Instead of keeping the money for my own retirement, I had signed the deed of our house over to Delilah and Jackson. A gift worth $380,000 at the time, given freely and with love. I remember the tears in Delilah's eyes when I handed her those papers. "Dad, this is too much. We can't accept this. Your mother would want you to have security," I had told her. "This way, you'll always have a home, no matter what happens." Jackson had shaken my hand with what seemed like genuine gratitude. "Mr. Carruthers, I promise we'll take care of you. This is your home too. Always." Always. What a meaningless word that turned out to be. For 6 years, the arrangement had worked perfectly. I lived in what was legally their house but felt like our family home. I contributed to groceries, helped with maintenance, and gradually convinced myself that giving away my most valuable asset had been an act of wise fatherly love. But sitting in that chair, water glass trembling in my hand, I finally understood the truth. I wasn't a beloved father living in his daughter's home. I was a tenant whose rent was paid in lifelong generosity, and tenants can be evicted when they become inconvenient. The guest room where I slept had been my master bedroom for 26 years. The garage where I kept my tools was filled with Jackson's fishing gear and Delilah's craft supplies. The kitchen where I had cooked thousands of meals for my family now felt foreign, like borrowed space in someone else's life. I had given them everything, and somehow in the process I had given away myself. Saturday morning brought the kind of autumn chill that seeps through windows and settles in your bones. I woke up feeling slightly stronger, the surgical pain reduced from excruciating to merely uncomfortable. Progress according to Dr. Martinez's discharge instructions. Delilah and Jackson were preparing for their weekly routine, grocery shopping followed by lunch at that expensive restaurant downtown, where the waiters wear bow ties and the entrees cost more than most people spend on groceries in a week. Their Saturday ritual, funded by the money they saved by living in a house they never had to buy. "We should be back around 4, Delilah announced, applying lipstick in the hallway mirror. She looked beautiful, I had to admit. At 31, she had inherited her mother's elegant features and natural grace. She was also wearing a designer coat that cost more than my monthly Social Security check. "Take your time," I replied from my chair. "I'll be fine here." Jackson jangled his keys to the BMW they had bought last year when his promotion came through. "You need anything while we're out?" It was a polite question, the kind of thing you ask because social convention demands it, but I decided to treat it like a genuine offer. "Actually, yes. Could you pick up my prescriptions from Walgreens? I'm running low on the cardiac medication." The pause that followed was microscopic, but I caught it. Jackson's enthusiasm dimmed like a light bulb losing power. "Oh, well, we were planning to go to the organic market on the other side of town, and Walgreens is kind of out of the way." "It's literally on your route to the restaurant," I pointed out, having driven that path hundreds of times myself. "Right, but we're meeting the Hendersons for lunch, and you know how Patricia gets when people are late." Delilah's voice carried the tone of someone explaining something obvious to a child. I sat quietly for a moment, processing this. My heart medication, the pills that keep me alive, were too inconvenient to pick up because they might make them 5 minutes late for lunch with friends. "I see," I said finally. "I suppose I can call a cab." "That's probably easier," Jackson agreed, already heading toward the door. "We'll see you later, Vince." The door closed behind them with the finality of a judge's gavel. I listened to the BMW purr to life in the driveway, then fade into the distance as they drove off to their carefree Saturday, leaving me to manage my post-surgical medical needs on my own. But this time, I wasn't hurt. I was curious. I had just conducted an experiment, and the results were illuminating. When people show you who they really are, the saying goes, believe them the first time. My daughter and son-in-law had just shown me exactly who they were when basic human decency conflicted with their personal convenience. The taxi ride to Walgreens cost $23 each way, $46 to pick up the medication that keeps my repaired heart functioning properly, because the people living rent-free in my house couldn't be bothered with a 3-minute detour. But that $46 was the best money I had spent in years, because it wasn't just taxi fare, it was the price of clarity. Monday morning found me sitting in the office of Burton Associates, the law firm I had used for various matters over the past decade. Harold Burton was pushing 70 himself, a sharp-minded attorney who understood the complexities of family wealth transfer and elder law. "Vincent, good to see you up and around after your surgery," Harold said, pouring coffee from an expensive-looking machine in the corner of his office. "Though I have to say, you look troubled. What's on your mind?" I had rehearsed this conversation during my sleepless Sunday night, choosing words carefully to convey my situation without sounding like a bitter old man complaining about his ungrateful children. "Harold, I need to review the house gift I made to Delilah 6 years ago. Specifically, I need to understand what legal options might exist if the arrangement isn't working as intended." Harold's eyebrows lifted slightly, but his expression remained professionally neutral. "The property on Sycamore Lane. Let me pull that file." He moved to a filing cabinet with the efficiency of someone who had spent decades organizing other people's legal problems. Within minutes, my life's biggest decision was spread across his mahogany desk in the form of deeds, transfer documents, and legal agreements I had signed with complete trust and minimal understanding. "Refresh my memory on the specific circumstances," Harold said, adjusting his reading glasses. "This was related to your wife's life insurance settlement, correct? Margaret's policy paid out $425,000. I used most of it to gift the house to Delilah and Jackson, thinking it would provide them security and ensure I always had a place in our family home." Harold nodded, scanning the documents. "And now you're having second thoughts about the arrangement?" "I'm having concerns about whether the spirit of the gift is being honored," I said carefully. The generosity was predicated on certain assumptions about family relationships and mutual care. "Ah," Harold leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled in the classic lawyer thinking pose. "You're wondering if there are grounds for gift revocation?" The phrase sent a jolt of electricity through my system. "Is that possible?" "Vincent, I have to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. Are they treating you poorly?" The question hung in the air like smoke. "How do you quantify emotional neglect? How do you explain to a lawyer that your daughter looks at you like you're an inconvenience rather than the man who raised her?" "They're not abusive," I said slowly. "But they're not kind. Since my surgery, I've asked for small favors, a glass of water, picking up prescriptions, and their responses have made it clear that they consider caring for me to be an unwelcome burden." Harold made notes on a legal pad. "Go on." "I gave them a house worth nearly $400,000, Harold. I gave them security and financial freedom. In return, I expected basic human decency, especially during my medical recovery. That expectation appears to have been naive. Virginia has specific statutes regarding gift revocation," Harold said, pulling a thick legal reference from his bookshelf. "Gross ingratitude is recognized as valid grounds for revoking substantial gifts, particularly when the recipient's behavior toward the donor is hostile or cruel." Gross ingratitude. The legal term for what I had been living with, but hadn't known how to name. "What would the process look like?" I asked, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. "First, we'd need to document specific instances of their poor treatment. Then we'd file a petition for gift revocation based on material change in circumstances and recipient ingratitude." Harold turned several pages in the legal reference. "If successful, the property would revert to your ownership, and they would be required to vacate." The room seemed to hold its breath as those words sank in. After 6 years of feeling like a guest in my own life, I was learning that I still had legal options. That generosity didn't have to mean powerlessness. How long would such a process take? With proper documentation and clear evidence of ingratitude, probably 60 to 90 days, Harold replied. Though I should mention that this would likely end your relationship with your daughter permanently. I thought about Saturday's refusal to pick up my heart medication. I thought about being told I wasn't worth a glass of water after surgery. I thought about 6 years of gradually escalating disrespect disguised as normal family dynamics. "Harold," I said quietly, "I'm beginning to think that relationship ended some time ago. I just didn't want to admit it." He nodded with the wisdom of someone who had guided other families through similar painful realizations. "Would you like me to prepare a preliminary assessment of your legal standing?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. Yes, I would. Wednesday evening brought the perfect opportunity to gather the evidence Harold had requested. Delilah and Jackson were hosting their weekly poker game, which meant the house would be full of their friends, alcohol would be flowing, and their true personalities would be on full display. I positioned myself in the living room with a book, appearing to read while actually observing the social dynamics of people who had forgotten I was a human being rather than furniture. "Vincent, could you grab us some ice from the garage freezer?" Jackson called out during the second hand of cards. A simple request, but loaded with assumptions. I was still recovering from major surgery, The garage was down a flight of stairs that aggravated my surgical incisions, and there were 4 able-bodied people in the room who could have retrieved ice without physical discomfort. Actually, the stairs are still difficult for me, I replied. Perhaps one of your guests could help with that? The pause that followed was loaded with silent communication between Jackson and Delilah. Then Jackson laughed, not with humor, but with the cruel edge of someone who enjoyed making others uncomfortable. Come on, Vince. Don't be dramatic. It's just stairs. He's been milking this surgery thing for 2 weeks, Delilah added, her voice carrying clearly across the room. The doctor said he was fine for normal activities. Normal activities. Perhaps for someone who hadn't had their chest cracked open and their heart stopped twice, but that detail seemed irrelevant to my daughter's assessment of my capabilities. I stood up slowly, making no effort to hide the discomfort the movement caused. The surgical site pulled and burned, but I had learned that showing weakness only invited more cruelty. The trip to the garage and back took nearly 10 minutes. 10 minutes of careful navigation, physical pain, and growing resentment that I was being used as free labor by people who lived in my former house. When I returned with the ice bucket, the conversation stopped. 5 pairs of eyes watched me like I was a servant who had taken too long with a simple task. Finally, Jackson muttered, dealing another hand of cards. But the most damaging moment came an hour later, when one of their friends asked an innocent question. Vince seems like he's still recovering pretty seriously from his surgery, the friend observed. That's really major stuff, right? Oh, he's fine, Delilah replied dismissively. He just likes the attention. He's been playing the victim card since he got home from the hospital. The victim card, as if nearly dying twice on an operating table was some kind of performance art designed to inconvenience her social life. Jackson nodded in agreement. He keeps asking us to do things for him. Bring him water, pick up prescriptions, grab ice. We're not his personal servants, you know? Personal servants. There was that phrase again, the one that had started this entire revelation about who they really were underneath the facade of loving family members. I mean, we let him live here rent-free, Delilah continued, her voice taking on the tone of someone explaining their generous charity work. The least he can do is handle his own basic needs. Let him live here. In the house I had given them, with the money from their mother's life insurance policy, the house where I had lived for 26 years before their names ever appeared on a deed. The friend looked uncomfortable, clearly sensing that something was wrong with this conversation but not knowing how to respond. Well, I just thought, heart surgery is pretty serious. Not as serious as he makes it out to be, Jackson interrupted with a laugh that held no warmth. Trust me, if you had to live with the constant demands for help, you'd understand. I excused myself and went to my room, where I spent the next hour writing detailed notes about everything I had just witnessed. Harold would want dates, times, specific quotes, and witnesses. The poker night had provided all of that in abundance. But more importantly, it had provided absolute confirmation that my situation wasn't going to improve through patience or understanding. These people had fundamentally decided that I was a burden they were graciously tolerating, rather than the man who had made their lifestyle possible. The next morning, I called Harold's office and scheduled an appointment to begin formal revocation proceedings. Friday afternoon brought Indian summer weather, the kind of October day that makes you forget winter is coming. I was sitting on the front porch, enjoying the warmth and planning my next conversation with Harold, when Mrs. Patterson from across the street walked over with her usual friendly smile. Vincent, so good to see you getting some fresh air. How are you feeling after your surgery? Mrs. Patterson was 73, a widow who had lived on Sycamore Lane for almost as long as I had. Her genuine concern felt like water after weeks in the desert. Better each day, thanks for asking, Ruth. Though recovery is slower than I expected. Oh, I'm sure it is. Heart surgery is no joke. Are Delilah and Jackson taking good care of you? The question hung in the autumn air like a challenge. Here was my opportunity to maintain the fiction that everything was fine, to protect my daughter's reputation in the neighborhood, to keep up the appearances that had been drilled into me by a lifetime of social conditioning. Instead, I told the truth. Actually, Ruth, they've made it clear that caring for me is more inconvenience than they're willing to tolerate. Her eyes widened with genuine shock. Oh, Vincent, I'm sure they're just stressed. Having a family member recover from surgery can be overwhelming. They refused to pick up my cardiac medication because it would make them late for lunch with friends, I said quietly. They told me I was playing the victim card when I asked for help with physically difficult tasks. They've explained to their friends that letting me live here rent-free should be payment enough for any assistance I might need. Mrs. Patterson's face went through several expressions: surprise, concern, and then something that looked like recognition. Vincent, I have to tell you something. I've been wondering about their attitude toward you for a while now. What do you mean? Last month, when you were working in the garden, I complimented Delilah on what a wonderful job you were doing with the landscaping. Her response was unusual. I waited for her to continue. She said, "Well, he has to earn his keep somehow." I thought it was a strange way to talk about your father, but I didn't want to pry. Earn his keep. Like a hired hand rather than the man who had provided them with everything they owned. Ruth, I said carefully, what I'm about to tell you must stay between us for now. This house isn't actually theirs. I gave it to them as a gift 6 years ago, but I'm in the process of revoking that gift due to their treatment of me. Her mouth fell open. You can do that? Apparently so. Gross ingratitude is grounds for gift revocation under Virginia law. Mrs. Patterson was quiet for a long moment processing this information. Vincent, I have to say, I'm not entirely surprised. The way they've been talking about you lately, it didn't sit right with me. How have they been talking about me? She looked uncomfortable but pressed on. Just little comments here and there, about how demanding you've become since your surgery, how you expect them to wait on you hand and foot, how living with an elderly parent is more work than they expected. Each word felt like a small knife, but I was grateful for the honesty. Thank you for telling me that, Ruth. It confirms what I've been suspecting. What will you do? I looked at the house I had built with my own hands, given away in love, and was now preparing to reclaim through legal action. I'm going to remind them what gratitude looks like. That evening, I called Harold from my cell phone while Delilah and Jackson were out at their Friday night dinner routine. Harold, I want to move forward with the revocation proceedings. I have all the documentation you requested, plus witness statements from neighbors. Are you certain, Vincent? Once we file these papers, there's no going back. Your relationship with Delilah will be permanently damaged. I thought about Mrs. Patterson's revelations, about being described as someone who had to earn his keep in the house his wife's death had purchased. I thought about 6 years of gradually escalating disrespect that I had rationalized as normal family friction. Harold, I think that relationship was damaged long ago. I just didn't want to see it. All right then. I'll have the papers ready for filing on Monday morning. Sunday dinner had always been sacred in our family. Even after Margaret's death, even after I gave away our house, Sunday dinner remained the one time each week when we sat together as a family and pretended that love still connected us across the growing chasm of resentment and entitlement. This Sunday, I had prepared Margaret's famous pot roast recipe, spending most of the afternoon in the kitchen despite the physical discomfort. Cooking had always been therapeutic for me, and today I needed the familiar ritual to prepare for what was coming. Delilah and Jackson settled at the dining room table with the casual expectation of people accustomed to being served. The pot roast was perfect, the vegetables tender, the conversation light and meaningless. Normal family dinner except for the legal documents folded in my shirt pocket. Dad, this is delicious, Delilah said, cutting another piece of meat. You really outdid yourself. Thank you. I wanted tonight to be special. Jackson looked up from his plate. Special occasion? In a way, yes. I set down my fork and looked at both of them directly. I want to talk about our living situation. The change in atmosphere was immediate. Delilah's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Jackson's easy smile faded into something more cautious. "What about it?" Delilah asked. "I've been doing some thinking since my surgery, about family relationships and what we owe each other." I kept my voice calm, conversational. "I gave you this house as a gift 6 years ago, with certain expectations about how we would treat each other." "Dad, where's this going?" Jackson's voice carried a warning edge. "I'm going toward honesty, Jackson, something that's been missing from our family conversations for quite a while." I pulled the legal documents from my pocket and placed them on the table next to the pot roast. Official letterhead from Burton Associates, formal legal language, the kind of papers that change lives permanently. "These are revocation papers for the gift deed I executed 6 years ago. As of Monday morning, this house legally reverts to my ownership, and you have 30 days to find alternative living arrangements." The silence that followed was profound. Delilah stared at the papers as if they were written in hieroglyphics. Jackson's face went through several color changes, settling on a shade of red that suggested barely controlled anger. "You can't be serious," Delilah whispered. "I'm completely serious. The legal term is gross ingratitude, which refers to when gift recipients treat the donor with cruelty or hostility that justifies revocation." Jackson stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "This is insane. You can't just decide to take back a gift because we hurt your feelings." "Actually, I can. Virginia law is quite clear on this matter." I remained seated, projecting calm while my heart hammered against my still healing ribs. "The question isn't whether I can do this. The question is why I need to do this." Delilah picked up the papers with trembling hands. "Dad, please. I know we haven't been perfect, but this is our home." "No, Delilah. This was my home. I gave it to you as an expression of love and trust, believing that you would honor the spirit of that gift by treating me as a beloved family member, rather than an unwelcome burden." "We don't treat you like a burden." Her voice rose with desperation. "You told your poker friends that I was playing the victim card when I asked for help during my surgical recovery. You refused to pick up my heart medication because it would inconvenience your lunch plans. You've explained to neighbors that I have to earn my keep through manual labor." Jackson's face went pale. They hadn't realized their casual cruelty was being documented, witnessed, and remembered. "You've been spying on us?" Delilah asked, her voice cracking. "I've been living with you, which apparently made me invisible enough that you felt comfortable expressing your true feelings about my presence in your life." I stood up slowly, the motion sending familiar twinges through my chest. 6 years ago, I used your mother's life insurance money to buy you security and comfort. In return, I expected basic human kindness. That was apparently too much to ask." "Mom's insurance money?" Delilah's voice was barely a whisper. $425,000, Delilah. The house you've been living in rent-free was purchased with money from your mother's life insurance policy. She died believing that money would bring our family together and provide security for all of us." The color drained from Delilah's face as this revelation hit her. Jackson sat down heavily, as if his legs had suddenly forgotten how to support him. "You never told us," Jackson said weakly. "I didn't want you to feel guilty about living in a house that your mother's death had made possible. I wanted you to see it as a father's gift, not as something purchased with tragedy." Delilah began to cry, but they weren't the manipulative tears I had seen during previous family conflicts. These were the tears of someone finally understanding the magnitude of what they had done. "I want you to understand exactly what you've thrown away," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "This house where you told me I wasn't worth a glass of water, where you explained to friends that I was malingering after heart surgery, where you made me feel like an unwelcome stranger. This house exists because your mother spent 20 years paying life insurance premiums to protect our family." Jackson put his arm around Delilah as she sobbed. "Mr. Carruthers, we can fix this. We can change." "The time for change was 6 years ago when I entrusted you with the most valuable thing I owned. The time for change was 2 weeks ago, when I came home from the hospital hoping for basic compassion. The time for change was every day in between when you chose selfishness over gratitude. I walked around the table and gathered the legal documents. You have 30 days. I suggest you use them wisely. Monday morning arrived with the crisp clarity that only comes after a sleepless night of decision-making. I had spent the dark hours replaying every moment of Sunday's confrontation, questioning whether I was being too harsh, too unforgiving, too final in my judgment. Then I remembered Jackson laughing about how I was milking my heart surgery, and all doubts evaporated. Harold's office felt like a sanctuary as I settled into the familiar leather chair across from his desk. The legal machinery was already in motion, papers filed, processes initiated, the irreversible sequence of events that would reclaim what had always been mine. The revocation papers were filed at 9 a.m. sharp, Harold reported, adjusting his glasses to review a checklist. The court clerk confirmed receipt and the 30-day notice period begins today. How will they be served? Professional process server will deliver papers to the property this afternoon. They'll be legally notified that their occupancy rights have been terminated due to gross ingratitude and breach of implied gift conditions. The clinical language felt appropriate somehow. After 6 years of emotional manipulation and gradual degradation of family bonds, it was refreshing to deal with simple legal facts. What should I expect in terms of their response? Harold leaned back in his chair with the weary expression of someone who had guided too many families through similar destructions. Typically, there's an initial period of disbelief, followed by anger, then desperate attempts at reconciliation, and finally acceptance or prolonged legal battle. Which do you expect in this case? Based on what you've told me about their financial situation and their behavior patterns, I suspect they'll try emotional manipulation first, then legal challenges they can't afford, and finally grudging acceptance when they realize they have no viable alternatives. Through the office window, I could see normal Monday morning activities continuing. People heading to work, living their lives, unaware that the legal system was quietly correcting 6 years of family dysfunction just a few blocks away. Vincent, I need to ask you one more time. Are you prepared for the possibility that this will end your relationship with your daughter permanently? I had considered that question for 72 sleepless hours. Harold, I buried my wife 6 years ago. I gave away my house to ensure my daughter's security. I nearly died on an operating table last week. Through all of that, the only thing that sustained me was the belief that family bonds mattered, that love and sacrifice would be returned with love and gratitude. I paused to let that sink in. Yesterday, I learned that my daughter describes me as someone who has to earn his keep in the house her mother's death purchased. If that relationship is worth preserving, Harold, then I don't understand what family means anymore. Harold nodded with the gravity of someone who had seen too many families destroy themselves through greed and ingratitude. I'll call you as soon as the papers are served. The drive home felt different than it had in weeks. For the first time since my surgery, I wasn't returning to a place where I felt unwelcome. I was returning to my house, legally, officially, and soon to be practically. The process server arrived at 3:47 p.m., according to the kitchen clock I watched through the window. A professional woman in her 40s, carrying a manila envelope that contained 6 years' worth of accumulated disappointment distilled into legal language. I observed from my bedroom window as she rang the doorbell. Delilah answered, still in her work clothes from her job at the marketing firm downtown. The conversation was brief, identification presented, papers delivered, signature obtained, legal requirements satisfied with the efficiency of a system that had handled thousands of similar domestic situations. Delilah held the envelope for a long moment after the process server drove away. Even from my second-floor vantage point, I could see her hands trembling. She knew what those papers contained, but receiving them officially transformed yesterday's family confrontation into today's legal reality. Jackson's BMW pulled into the driveway 20 minutes later. I watched him approach the house with his usual casual confidence, unaware that his world was about to shift permanently off its axis. The conversation that followed was invisible to me, but audible through the thin walls of a house I had built 40 years ago, before energy efficiency codes required better insulation. Raised voices, Jackson's distinctive laugh turning sharp and bitter, the sound of papers being thrown across a room. Then came the footsteps on the stairs. The knock on my bedroom door was sharp, aggressive. "Dad, we need to talk. Now." I opened the door to find both of them standing in the hallway, their faces a mixture of anger, disbelief, and something that might have been panic. Jackson held the legal papers in his clenched fist like evidence of a crime he couldn't quite believe had been committed. "This is real?" Delilah's voice was small, confused. "You're actually doing this?" "The papers speak for themselves," I replied calmly. "Dad, please. We can work this out. We can go to family counseling. We can change how we communicate. You can find somewhere else to live," I interrupted gently. "The legal process is already in motion." Jackson stepped forward, his posture threatening in a way that made me grateful for the open doorway and my proximity to the stairs. "You can't just throw us out like garbage. We have rights." "Actually, you don't. That's what the papers explain. Your occupancy was always conditional on maintaining family relationships built on mutual respect and care. You violated those conditions repeatedly." "What conditions?" Delilah demanded. "You never told us about any conditions." "I shouldn't have needed to. When someone gives you a house worth $400,000, common decency suggests you might treat them with basic kindness, especially during medical recovery." Jackson waved the papers angrily. "This is about a glass of water? You're destroying our family over a glass of water?" "No, Jackson. You destroyed our family when you decided I wasn't worth a glass of water. I'm just making the legal consequences match the emotional reality you created. Where are we supposed to go?" Delilah's question came out as a wail. "Do you have any idea how expensive rent is? How much it costs to find a place with 30 days' notice?" I looked at my daughter, my beautiful, educated, successful daughter who had just asked me to solve the problem her own cruelty had created. "That's not my concern anymore, Delilah. You made it clear that my concerns weren't yours, so reciprocity seems appropriate." "This is insane," Jackson shouted. "We're family. You can't treat family like this." "I agree completely," I said quietly. "You can't treat family like this. That's exactly why you're being evicted." The silence that followed was thick with the weight of consequences neither of them had seen coming. They had gambled that family bonds would protect them from accountability, and they were learning that some bets don't pay off. "Dad," Delilah tried one more time, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry for how we treated you. Can't we fix this?" "The time for fixing things was 6 years ago when I trusted you with the most valuable thing I owned. The time for fixing things was 2 weeks ago when I came home from the hospital hoping for compassion. The time for fixing things was every day in between when you chose to see me as a burden, rather than the man who made your lifestyle possible." I stepped back into my bedroom preparing to close the door. "You have 27 days left. I suggest you use them productively." Tuesday brought the first signs that my legal action was having consequences beyond simple housing displacement. Jackson called in sick to work, the first time in his 3-year employment history, according to the anxious phone conversation I overheard him having with his supervisor. Delilah spent the morning on her laptop, frantically searching rental listings and calculating deposits, first month's rent, moving costs, and all the financial realities that had been invisible to them when someone else was providing free housing. "Jesus Christ, Delilah, look at this." Jackson's voice carried from the kitchen where they had spread newspapers and printed listings across the table like a disaster relief map. 2-bedroom apartments start at $20,400 a month, plus deposit, plus utilities, plus we need good credit and references and proof of income, Delilah added, her voice hollow with dawning comprehension. "We've been living rent-free for 6 years. We don't have landlord references." The mathematics of their situation were becoming clear. Jackson's salary covered their current lifestyle because their only housing cost was groceries and utilities. Adding $2,400 monthly rent would require fundamental changes to their spending habits. Fewer dinners out, no more designer clothes, goodbye to the BMW lease payments. They were learning what most adults their age had known for years. Housing is expensive, and financial independence requires sacrifice. Maybe we could find something cheaper if we moved farther out, Jackson suggested. Farther out means longer commutes, which means more gas money and car maintenance. Delilah replied with the bitter wisdom of someone rapidly becoming educated about real-world economics. Plus, look at these neighborhoods. Would you want to live in any of these areas? The answer apparently was no. They had become accustomed to suburban comfort, tree-lined streets, and the social status that comes with a good address. Moving to an affordable apartment complex would mean acknowledging that their lifestyle had been subsidized by someone else's generosity. Wednesday brought a different kind of desperation. I found Delilah in the living room, surrounded by photo albums and scrapbooks, tears streaming down her face as she turned pages filled with family memories. "Dad, look at this." She held up a picture from her college graduation, the three of us smiling on campus with the pride that comes from shared accomplishment. Look how happy we were. Look how much we loved each other. I sat down carefully in my chair, studying the photograph. 6 years ago, before entitlement had poisoned everything, before gratitude had been replaced by expectation. We were happy, I agreed. But look at where we are now. We can get back there. I know we can. We just need time to remember how to be a family again. Delilah, that photo was taken 3 months before your mother died. 3 months before I used her life insurance money to buy you this house. Look at the timeline of our relationship deterioration. She flipped through more pages and I could see her processing the pattern. Family closeness before the house gift, gradual cooling afterward, increasing entitlement as the years passed. "I never meant for it to happen this way," she whispered. "I know you didn't. But intentions matter less than actions. And your actions have made it clear that you see me as someone who owes you support rather than someone who chose to provide it. What can I do to fix this?" The question hung between us like a bridge neither of us knew how to cross. After years of accumulated resentment and weeks of legal proceedings, was redemption even possible? Delilah, you can't fix 6 years of taking me for granted with 24 days of panic-induced kindness. Real change requires real understanding, and real understanding takes time we no longer have. She closed the photo album and looked at me with something I hadn't seen in years. Genuine vulnerability instead of manipulative performance. "I want you to know that I finally understand what we did to you. Not because of the eviction, but because of how it feels to lose something you thought was permanent. We took you for granted the same way we took this house for granted. That's the first honest thing you've said to me in months. Will that count for anything?" I looked around the living room where we had shared thousands of ordinary moments that had slowly transformed into something toxic. "It counts for understanding, Delilah, but understanding consequences doesn't eliminate them." Thursday afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Patterson knocked on my door with the determined expression of someone who had made a difficult decision. "Vincent, I need to talk to you about something important." I invited her in, grateful for friendly company during what had become the most isolating week of my life. She settled into the chair Delilah usually occupied, her purse clutched tightly in her lap. "I've been struggling with whether to tell you this, but after seeing that process server on Monday, I think you need to know." I waited while she gathered her courage. 3 weeks ago, when you were in the hospital, Delilah and Jackson had a party. A big one, with music and drinking and people I'd never seen before. This was news to me. During my hospital stay, they had visited once and mentioned nothing about entertaining. It wasn't just any party, Vincent. They were celebrating. Celebrating what? Mrs. Patterson's face flushed with embarrassment. I overheard Delilah talking to one of her friends. She said, and I quote, "We finally have the house to ourselves. No more walking on eggshells around the old man." The words hit me like a physical blow. While I was lying in a hospital bed, recovering from surgery that had stopped my heart twice, my daughter was celebrating my absence. There's more, Mrs. Patterson continued reluctantly. Jackson was telling people that they were thinking about converting your bedroom into a home office. He said it would be nice to have the extra space now that you weren't taking up so much room. Converting my bedroom. Planning my erasure from the house while I was fighting for my life in a cardiac unit. They were planning to ask you to move to the basement, Mrs. Patterson added quietly. Delilah said you didn't need a full bedroom anymore since you spent most of your time in that chair anyway. I absorbed this information with the numb fascination of someone watching a car accident in slow motion. The basement. They had been planning to relocate me to the basement of my own house, like unwanted furniture being stored out of sight. Vincent, I'm so sorry. I should have told you sooner, but I hoped they were just talking foolishly and would come to their senses. Ruth, thank you for telling me this. It confirms that my legal action is necessary, not just justified. She nodded with visible relief. I've been feeling guilty about it for weeks. When I saw that process server, I realized you had figured out what kind of people they really are. After Mrs. Patterson left, I sat in my chair contemplating this new information. The eviction papers I had served weren't just about a glass of water or prescription medications. They were about fundamental disrespect so deep that my own daughter had celebrated my absence and planned my demotion to basement dwelling. The basement. A damp, windowless space where I would have been even more isolated, even more dependent on their grudging charity, even more vulnerable to their expanding cruelty. That evening, when Delilah and Jackson returned from another house hunting expedition, I was ready for them. How was the party? I asked as they settled wearily at the kitchen table. They looked at me with confusion. What party? The celebration you held while I was in the hospital. The one where you discussed converting my bedroom to office space and moving me to the basement. The color drained from both their faces. Jackson's mouth opened and closed without producing sound, while Delilah stared at me like I had just spoken in ancient Greek. Who told you that? Delilah whispered. Does it matter? What matters is that while I was recovering from heart surgery, you were celebrating your freedom from my presence and planning to demote me to basement living. Dad, it wasn't like that. You were just what, Delilah? Just planning my erasure from the house my wife's death purchased. Just celebrating the possibility that I might not survive surgery. Jackson found his voice. We never wanted you to die. We were just stressed about having you in the house while you recovered, and maybe we said some things. You said I was taking up too much room. You planned to relocate me to the basement. You celebrated having the house to yourselves. Each statement landed like a hammer blow. And now you want me to believe you're capable of change? Please, Dad. We were drunk. We were scared about your surgery. We said stupid things. You revealed who you really are when you thought I couldn't hear you. That's not alcohol talking, Delilah. That's honesty. I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 68 years in my bones. 21 days. And if you throw any more parties before you leave, I'll contact the police about trespassing. Friday brought a revelation that explained much about Delilah and Jackson's increasing desperation. I discovered them in the dining room, surrounded by bank statements, credit card bills, and what appeared to be a financial planning spreadsheet that painted a grim picture of their actual economic situation. Mind if I ask how the apartment hunting is going? I inquired, settling into my chair with my morning coffee. Jackson looked up from a calculator, his face haggard with the kind of exhaustion that comes from mathematical reality. Not well. Every place we can afford is either too far from our jobs or in neighborhoods we wouldn't feel safe in. And the places in safe neighborhoods cost more than our entire monthly income, Delilah added, highlighting something on a rental listing with the violent yellow of a marker running out of ink. I glanced at their financial documents, spread across the table like evidence in a bankruptcy hearing. May I ask what your monthly expenses are? It was a personal question, but under the circumstances, their financial planning affected my timeline for reclaiming my house. Jackson hesitated, then seemed to decide that honesty might serve them better than privacy. After taxes, we bring home about $4,800 a month. And your expenses? Car payments, insurance, credit cards, utilities, groceries, student loans. Delilah ticked off items on her fingers. About $3,400 a month. The mathematics were sobering. They had been living a lifestyle that required one $400 monthly surplus, money that only existed because they paid no rent. Add housing costs to their budget, and they would be running a deficit of at least $1,000 every month. What about savings? I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. What savings? Jackson's laugh was bitter. We've been living paycheck to paycheck for 2 years. Everything extra goes to credit card minimums and trying to keep up with our friends' lifestyles. So you have no emergency fund, no moving expenses saved, no security deposits available? Dad, that's why this eviction is so catastrophic for us, Delilah pleaded. We literally cannot afford to move. We have nowhere to go and no money to get there. I looked at these two college-educated adults who had spent 6 years living rent-free and somehow managed to save nothing, build no financial foundation, create no backup plan for the possibility that free housing might not last forever. Delilah, you've been living in a house worth $400,000 without paying rent, utilities, or property taxes for 6 years. Where did all that saved money go? She gestured helplessly at their lifestyle documentation scattered across the table. Living. Just living. Living beyond your means, I corrected. You've been subsidizing an unsustainable lifestyle with my generosity, and now you're shocked to discover that generosity has limits. Jackson stood up abruptly, knocking his chair backward. So what are we supposed to do? Live in our car? Move in with friends who can barely afford their own rent? You're supposed to face the same financial realities that most people your age have been dealing with for their entire adult lives, I replied calmly. You're supposed to learn what housing actually costs and adjust your spending accordingly. We can't afford to adjust. Delilah's voice rose to near hysteria. Our car payments alone are $800 a month. We owe $30,000 in credit card debt. We can't just cut expenses. The full scope of their financial irresponsibility was becoming clear. 6 years of rent-free living, and they had managed to accumulate massive debt while building no savings. They had treated my house like a financial safety net that allowed them to live recklessly, never considering what would happen if that safety net disappeared. Perhaps, I said quietly, you should have considered these realities before deciding I wasn't worth basic human kindness. Dad, please, we'll lose everything. You'll lose the things you couldn't actually afford to own. Sometimes that's called learning. I gathered my coffee and headed toward my bedroom, leaving them to contemplate the wreckage of their financial planning. Behind me, I could hear Delilah beginning to cry and Jackson making desperate phone calls to friends who might provide temporary shelter. The sound of their panic was no longer satisfying. It was simply the inevitable consequence of choices they had made freely and repeatedly for 6 years. Saturday morning brought an unexpected convoy. 3 cars pulled into my driveway in quick succession, disgorging a collection of people I recognized as Delilah's friends and extended family members. An intervention, apparently, orchestrated by my daughter as a last-ditch effort to reverse the legal proceedings that would soon cost them their home. I watched from the front window as the group gathered on my lawn like protesters preparing for a march. Delilah's sister Rebecca had driven down from Richmond. Jackson's brother Marcus was there with his wife. Several of their mutual friends completed the assembly, people who had attended the infamous hospital celebration party, though they probably hoped I didn't know about that. The doorbell rang with the authority of a group that believed they had moral righteousness on their side. I opened the door to find Rebecca in the lead, her expression carrying the righteous indignation of someone who had heard only one version of events. Uncle Vincent, we need to talk. Rebecca. What a surprise. I stepped aside to let them enter, curious about what kind of pressure campaign they had devised. The group arranged themselves in my living room like a jury, with Rebecca clearly designated as the spokesperson. Delilah and Jackson sat together on the couch looking like defendants awaiting verdict. Uncle Vincent, we're here because we're concerned about this family situation getting out of hand. Rebecca began with the practiced tone of someone who had rehearsed this speech. Delilah has explained what's happening, and we think there might be some misunderstandings that could be resolved through communication. I settled into my chair, interested to hear their interpretation of events. What kind of misunderstandings? Well, for starters, the idea that Delilah and Jackson have been treating you badly. We've known them for years, and they're not cruel people. They're stressed about your health, worried about your recovery, trying to balance taking care of you with their own lives. Taking care of me. The revision of history was impressive in its boldness. Rebecca, what has Delilah told you about my requests for assistance during my recovery? That you've been asking them to do things for you that you could probably do yourself. And when they suggest you try to maintain some independence, you get upset. I looked at Delilah, who was studying her hands with the focused intensity of someone trying to become invisible. Is that how you described refusing to bring me water after heart surgery? Dad, please, Delilah whispered. Marcus leaned forward. Mr. Carruthers, don't you think eviction is a pretty extreme response to family communication problems? Marcus, let me ask you something. If your father gave you a house worth $400,000, and then during his recovery from life-threatening surgery, you told him he wasn't worth a glass of water, what do you think would be an appropriate consequence? The room fell silent. Rebecca's prepared speech apparently hadn't included scenarios where the actual facts of the situation were this stark. But families work through problems, one of their friends insisted. You don't throw people out on the street over temporary difficulties. You're right, I agreed. Families do work through problems. What do you do when some family members decide that other family members aren't worth working with? Rebecca tried to regain control of the conversation. Uncle Vincent, I think you're hurt and maybe not thinking clearly about the long-term consequences of this decision. Delilah is your daughter. Jackson is like a son to you. This house will feel very empty when they're gone. Rebecca, let me share something with you. I stood up and walked to the dining room, returning with the folder of financial documents I had prepared for Harold. This house was purchased with the life insurance money from Margaret's death. When Delilah tells people I'm taking up too much room in a house her mother's death provided for our family security, what do you think Margaret would say about that? I opened the folder and spread insurance papers across the coffee table. $425,000 paid out after Margaret died, believing that money would keep our family together and ensure we took care of each other. The room was completely quiet now. Several people leaned forward to examine the insurance documents, their expressions shifting as they realized the full scope of what was really at stake. Delilah never told us the house came from Aunt Margaret's life insurance, Rebecca said quietly. Delilah has told you a lot of things that weren't complete truths, I replied. The question is, do you still think I'm overreacting to temporary communication problems? Marcus looked at his brother with something that might have been disappointment. Jackson, you never mentioned the life insurance situation. We didn't think it mattered, Jackson muttered. It didn't matter that you were living rent-free in a house that your wife's mother died to provide? Marcus's voice carried disbelief. It didn't matter that you were treating the man who gave you everything like he was inconveniencing you? The intervention was collapsing as the assembled supporters realized they had been recruited under false pretenses. They had come to help resolve a family misunderstanding and discovered instead that they were defending the indefensible. Rebecca gathered the insurance papers and handed them back to me. Uncle Vincent, I owe you an apology. Delilah didn't explain the full situation. Delilah has spent 6 years not explaining the full situation, I replied. To herself, to you, and apparently to her own husband. One by one, the intervention team made their excuses and left. Rebecca was the last to go, pausing at the door to speak privately. I had no idea, Uncle Vincent. If I had known what was really going on, I would never have come here to pressure you. I know, Rebecca. Delilah is very skilled at presenting herself as the victim of circumstances rather than the creator of them. After they left, I found Delilah and Jackson sitting in shell-shocked silence in the living room. Their last hope for external pressure to reverse my decision had not only failed, but had left them more isolated than before. "That backfired," Jackson said finally. "It backfired because the truth has a way of exposing lies," I replied. "Your friends and family aren't going to pressure me to continue enabling your ingratitude once they understand what's really been happening." 16 days, Delilah said quietly. 16 days, I confirmed. Monday brought what I later recognized as the inevitable escalation. Desperation, I learned, makes people dangerous in ways that simple selfishness cannot. I was returning from a follow-up appointment with Dr. Martinez. Excellent progress, cleared for normal activities, the kind of medical news that should have been cause for celebration. Instead, I found Delilah and Jackson waiting for me in the living room with expressions that immediately put me on guard. "Dad, we need to talk," Delilah said, but her voice carried a new edge I hadn't heard before. I hung up my jacket and took my usual seat, noting that they had positioned themselves between me and the doorway. Subtle, but unmistakable. "What's on your mind?" Jackson leaned forward. "We've been thinking about your decision to evict us, and we've realized that you might not be thinking clearly about the consequences." "How so?" "Well," Delilah said carefully, "you're 68 years old, you just had major surgery, and you're about to be living alone in a big house with no family support system." I waited for her to continue. "What if something happens to you? What if you have another heart episode or fall down the stairs or have some kind of medical emergency? There would be nobody here to help you." "Are you offering to help me if I allow you to stay?" "We're pointing out that kicking us out might not be in your best interests," Jackson said. "Living alone at your age with your health issues is dangerous." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. They were suggesting that I needed them more than they needed me, that my medical vulnerability gave them leverage to reverse the eviction. "That's an interesting perspective," I said calmly. "Are you suggesting I should be afraid to live alone?" "We're suggesting that family takes care of family," Delilah replied, "and that maybe you should reconsider this eviction before you end up isolated and helpless." Isolated and helpless. The words were chosen carefully, designed to prey on the fears of an older man recovering from heart surgery. "Delilah, let me make sure I understand your position. You're arguing that I should allow you to continue living rent-free in my house because otherwise I might be vulnerable to medical emergencies?" "We're saying that you need us," Jackson interjected, "and that throwing us out over hurt feelings might be something you regret when you're lying on the floor unable to call for help." The conversation had crossed a line from family dispute into something darker. They were using my medical condition as a weapon, trying to create fear that would override my legal rights. "That sounds like a threat," I said quietly. "It's not a threat," Delilah protested. "It's a realistic assessment of your situation. You're elderly, you have heart problems, and you're choosing to isolate yourself from the people who care about you." "The people who care about me?" I stood up slowly, feeling anger build in my chest like steam in a kettle. "The people who celebrated my hospitalization, planned to move me to the basement, and told me I wasn't worth a glass of water?" "Dad, please, no." My voice carried a firmness that surprised even me. "You've just made this conversation much easier. You're not just ungrateful and cruel. You're willing to use my medical vulnerability to manipulate me into accepting your abuse." Jackson stood up too, his posture aggressive. "We're trying to protect you from making a stupid decision that you'll regret. The only thing I regret is waiting this long to recognize what you really are." I walked to the phone and dialed Harold's number, speaking loudly enough for them to hear every word. "Harold, it's Vincent Carruthers. I need to discuss accelerating the eviction timeline. My tenants have just threatened me with medical abandonment if I don't rescind the eviction notice." Behind me, I could hear urgent whispered conversation, but I didn't turn around. "Yes, I consider it a threat. They're suggesting that living alone at my age is dangerous and that I need them for my medical safety." I paused to listen to Harold's response. "That's exactly what I was thinking. I'll see you tomorrow morning." I hung up the phone and turned back to face them. Congratulations. You've just escalated this from a civil eviction to a potential elder abuse case. Dad, we weren't threatening you, Delilah said, but her voice lacked conviction. You were attempting to use my medical condition to coerce me into reversing a legal decision. In Virginia, that's called elder abuse, and it's a felony. The color drained from both their faces as they realized they had just criminalized their own behavior. We were just pointing out. You were just demonstrating that you're exactly as manipulative and dangerous as I suspected. 14 days just became 7 days. You can't do that, Jackson protested. Actually, threatening an elderly person to coerce them into changing legal decisions voids their occupancy rights immediately. Harold is filing for emergency eviction tomorrow morning. I walked toward the stairs, leaving them standing in the living room that would soon no longer be theirs in any sense. Pack quickly, I called over my shoulder. Your time just ran out. Tuesday morning found me sitting in Harold's office again, but this time the atmosphere was charged with urgency rather than deliberate planning. The conversation from the previous evening had transformed what was already a strong legal case into an emergency situation, requiring immediate judicial intervention. Vincent, what they did yesterday was extraordinarily stupid, Harold said, reviewing the notes I had provided about the intimidation attempt. Using your medical condition to pressure you into reversing legal decisions is textbook elder abuse. Can we accelerate the eviction? Better than that. We can file for an emergency protective order that requires immediate vacate. When adult children threaten elderly parents with abandonment to coerce property decisions, the court treats it as an urgent safety matter. Harold was already drafting documents as he spoke, his fingers moving across the keyboard with the practiced efficiency of someone who had handled too many similar cases. The emergency petition will be filed this morning. Given the circumstances, elder abuse threats, your recent heart surgery, their financial dependence creating coercive pressure, I expect we'll have a court order by this afternoon requiring them to vacate within 72 hours. That fast? Virginia courts take elder abuse very seriously, especially when it involves property coercion. Judge Morrison has seen dozens of cases where adult children use their parents' medical vulnerabilities as leverage, and she doesn't tolerate it. The legal machinery was moving faster than I had imagined possible. What started as a deliberate process of gift revocation had accelerated into emergency protection proceedings. What should I expect when the order is served? Shock, probably. They thought they were being clever with their intimidation tactic, but they actually handed us the legal grounds for immediate eviction. Harold printed several copies of the emergency petition. The order will be served by sheriff's deputies, which tends to clarify the seriousness of the situation. 2 hours later, I was sitting in my chair when 2 Fairfax County sheriff's vehicles pulled into my driveway. Professional, official, the kind of law enforcement presence that transforms family disputes into criminal matters. Delilah answered the door looking haggard, as if she hadn't slept since our confrontation the previous evening. The lead deputy was a woman in her 40s with the calm authority that comes from delivering bad news to people who thought they were above consequences. Ma'am, I need to speak with Delilah Richardson and Jackson Thompson regarding an emergency court order. That's us, Delilah stammered. You're being served with an emergency vacate order issued by the Fairfax County Circuit Court. You have 72 hours to remove all personal belongings and vacate these premises. Jackson appeared behind Delilah, his face pale. 72 hours? That's impossible. We need more time. Sir, the court has determined that your continued presence poses a threat to the welfare of the property owner. The order is effective immediately. The deputy handed them official documents that carried the weight of judicial authority. No more family negotiations, no more appeals to sentiment, no more opportunities for manipulation. What if we refuse to leave? Jackson's question came out as a challenge, but his voice betrayed the panic underneath. Then you'll be arrested for violating a court order, and your belongings will be placed on the curb. The deputy's tone remained professionally neutral. The court order also prohibits any contact with Mr. Carruthers except through legal representatives. No contact. I hadn't expected that provision, but it made sense. Having established that they were willing to use intimidation tactics, the court was protecting me from further coercion attempts. After the deputies left, I could hear frantic activity throughout the house. Phone calls, hurried packing, the sound of people realizing that consequences were no longer theoretical. I sat in my chair, watching through the window as they loaded their car with the belongings they could carry. 6 years of accumulated possessions being reduced to what fit in a BMW sedan and whatever boxes they could borrow from friends. The house felt different already. Not empty exactly, but cleared of something toxic that had been poisoning the air without my realizing it. Thursday evening arrived with unprecedented quiet. For the first time in 6 years, I was alone in my house, legally, completely, and peacefully alone. Delilah and Jackson had finished removing their belongings that morning, supervised by a deputy who ensured the process remained civil and efficient. I walked through rooms that felt simultaneously familiar and foreign. The living room where we had shared thousands of meals and conversations now seemed larger, as if the absence of resentment had created physical space. The kitchen where I had been denied water after heart surgery felt welcoming again, restored to its identity as the heart of a home rather than enemy territory. In Delilah's former bedroom, I found a single forgotten item, a framed photograph of Margaret and me from our 25th wedding anniversary. We were standing in front of this very house, her arm around my waist, both of us grinning with the satisfaction of people who had built something meaningful together. I picked up the photograph and carried it to the living room, placing it on the mantelpiece where it belonged. Margaret's smile seemed to approve of the quiet that had settled over our home. The phone rang around 8 o'clock. I checked the caller ID. Rebecca. Uncle Vincent, I hope it's okay that I'm calling. Of course, Rebecca. I heard about the emergency court order. Are you all right? I'm fine. Better than I've been in years, actually. I need to apologize again for Saturday. If I had known what was really happening, I never would have come there to pressure you. I know you wouldn't have. Delilah has always been skilled at presenting situations in ways that make her appear sympathetic. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. Marcus told me about the conversation he had with Jackson yesterday, about how they tried to scare you about living alone. They made a serious mistake with that approach. Uncle Vincent, I want you to know that if you ever need anything, someone to check on you, help with groceries, whatever, you just need to call. Family should actually take care of family. The offer brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Here was what family support was supposed to look like, freely given, without strings attached, offered by someone who had nothing to gain from the gesture. Thank you, Rebecca. That means more than you know. After we hung up, I made myself dinner in a kitchen that felt peaceful for the first time in months. No underlying tension, no careful navigation of family dynamics, no walking on eggshells in my own home. Friday brought an unexpected delivery. 2 letters slipped under my front door sometime during the night. One from Delilah, one from Jackson, written on hotel stationery that suggested they had found temporary accommodations somewhere in the area. I opened Delilah's letter first, curious what she might say now that the legal battles were over and consequences had been fully realized. Dad, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need to say some things that I should have said years ago. I've had 3 days to think about everything that happened, and I finally understand what we did to you. When you gave us the house, I thought it meant we were entitled to it. I thought your generosity was just the natural order of things, like how parents are supposed to provide for their children. I never understood that gifts require gratitude, or that generosity has limits. I'm sitting in a Holiday Inn right now, looking at our credit card bills and trying to figure out how we're going to afford rent anywhere, and I finally understand what you meant about financial responsibility. We've been living like wealthy people on borrowed money and free housing. We've been children playing house instead of adults building a life. But more than the money, I understand now what we did to your heart. When you asked for water after surgery, I saw it as an inconvenience instead of an opportunity to show love. When you needed help with prescriptions, I saw it as a burden instead of a chance to care for the man who raised me. When you were in the hospital, We celebrated your absence instead of praying for your recovery. I don't know if you can ever forgive me for that, Dad. I don't know if I can forgive myself. I want you to know that I finally understand what Mom's insurance money meant. It wasn't just money to buy a house. It was her way of making sure our family stayed together and took care of each other. We dishonored her memory and betrayed her intentions. I'm not asking you to reverse the eviction. I understand why you can't. I'm not asking for another chance because I understand why you won't give us one. I'm just asking you to know that I finally understand what we lost, and it wasn't just a house. We lost the father who would have done anything for us, because we convinced him he wasn't worth doing anything for. I love you, Dad. I should have shown you that every day instead of waiting until it was too late to matter. Delilah. Jackson's letter was shorter but carried its own weight. Mr. Carruthers, I owe you an apology that's about 6 years overdue. When you gave us the house, I promised to take care of you, and I failed completely. I got comfortable with your generosity and started taking it for granted. I forgot that you were doing us a favor and started acting like you owed us something. I forgot that you were Delilah's father and started treating you like a roommate we tolerated. The conversation on Monday was unforgivable. Using your health to try to manipulate you was wrong, and I knew it was wrong even as I was saying it. I was desperate and scared, but that's no excuse for threatening an elderly man who had given us everything. I've learned more about financial responsibility in the past 3 days than I did in 6 years of free rent. We're probably going to lose the cars, the credit cards are maxed out, and we're looking at apartments in neighborhoods I never thought we'd live in. But that's what happens when you live beyond your means and assume someone else will always bail you out. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I understand what we did was wrong. Delilah lost her father because of how we treated you, and I lost a man who was like a father to me. I'm sorry, Mr. Carruthers, for all of it. Jackson. I read both letters twice, then set them aside to consider their words. Remorse, I had learned, was different from regret. Regret focused on consequences. They were sorry they had been evicted, sorry they were facing financial hardship, sorry their comfortable lifestyle had been disrupted. But remorse focused on understanding. They were sorry they had hurt me, sorry they had dishonored Margaret's memory, sorry they had transformed love into entitlement. The letters suggested remorse, but they had come too late to change anything. Understanding the magnitude of your mistakes doesn't undo them, and sincere apologies don't resurrect relationships that have been killed by years of accumulated cruelty. 2 weeks later, I had settled into a routine that felt like reclaiming my own life. Morning coffee in the kitchen without navigating family tensions. Afternoon reading in the living room without feeling like an unwelcome guest. Evening meals prepared and eaten in peace without the underlying toxicity that had poisoned every shared moment. Mrs. Patterson had become a regular visitor, stopping by twice a week to check on me and share neighborhood news. Her friendship reminded me what normal human relationships looked like: mutual respect, genuine concern, the easy give and take of people who actually liked each other. You look different, she observed during one of her visits. Healthier, more relaxed. I feel different. It's amazing how much energy it takes to live with people who resent your presence. Have you heard from them? Letters, I replied. Apologetic letters that show they finally understand what they did. But understanding comes too late to matter. Mrs. Patterson nodded thoughtfully. Some bridges can't be rebuilt once they've been burned completely. Dr. Martinez had been pleased with my recovery progress. Blood pressure down, stress levels normalized. The kind of improvement that comes from removing chronic toxicity from your environment. Whatever changes you've made in your living situation, he had said, keep them up. Your cardiovascular health has improved dramatically. Harold had called to confirm that all legal proceedings were complete. The house was officially, unambiguously mine again. The gift revocation had been finalized, and any claims Delilah and Jackson might have had to the property were permanently extinguished. It's over, he had said. You're free to live your life without legal complications. Free. After 6 years of feeling trapped in my own home, the word carried weight that went far beyond legal terminology. 3 weeks after the eviction, on a Tuesday morning that had started like any other, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find a young woman in her mid-20s, holding flowers and wearing the nervous expression of someone about to have a difficult conversation. "Mr. Carruthers, I'm Amanda, Jackson's daughter from his first marriage. I hope it's okay that I came by." I had forgotten about Amanda entirely. Jackson had been married briefly in his early 20s, and Amanda lived with her mother in Oregon. I had met her perhaps half a dozen times over the years when she visited during holidays. "Amanda, of course. Please, come in." She settled nervously in the living room, still holding the flowers like a shield. "I brought these for you. I heard about what happened with my dad and Delilah, and I wanted to apologize." "You don't need to apologize for other people's behavior." "I kind of do, though, because I've known what my dad was like for years, and I should have warned you." This was unexpected. "What do you mean?" Amanda took a deep breath. "My parents divorced when I was 8 because my dad has this pattern. He finds people who are generous and giving, and he slowly convinces them that their generosity is actually obligation. He did it to my mom, he did it to you, and he'll probably do it to the next person who's kind to him." She set the flowers on the coffee table and looked at me directly. "When my mom finally divorced him, she said the worst part wasn't his laziness or his entitlement. It was how he made her feel guilty for not giving him more when she was already giving him everything." The description was painfully accurate. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because when I heard that you had evicted them, my first thought wasn't sympathy for my dad. It was relief that someone had finally stood up to him." Amanda's voice gained strength as she continued. "And because I wanted you to know that what happened wasn't your fault. You didn't fail as a father figure or do anything wrong. You just encountered someone who specializes in taking advantage of kind people." "What about Delilah?" Amanda's expression softened with something that might have been pity. "Delilah's not naturally cruel like my dad. But she's weak, and she let him convince her that entitlement was normal. When you're with someone who treats generosity like obligation, it changes how you see the world." We talked for another hour, and Amanda shared stories about Jackson's behavior patterns that illuminated years of interactions I had misinterpreted. His gradual escalation of demands, his skill at making people feel guilty for setting boundaries, his ability to reframe other people's kindness as evidence that they owed him more. "The thing about my dad," Amanda said as she prepared to leave, "is that he always pushes until something breaks. He can't help himself. With my mom, it was their marriage. With you, it was your relationship with Delilah. He won't be happy until he's destroyed whatever good thing he's been given access to." After she left, I sat in my chair processing this new understanding. I hadn't failed at family relationships or been too harsh in my expectations. I had simply encountered someone who was skilled at exploiting generosity and had gradually infected my daughter with the same toxic attitudes. The realization was both heartbreaking and liberating. Heartbreaking because it meant Delilah had been corrupted by her husband's influence rather than naturally cruel. Liberating because it confirmed that my decision to reclaim my house had been necessary to protect myself from continued exploitation. A month after Amanda's visit, Rebecca called with news that would force me to confront the question I had been avoiding. "Uncle Vincent, I thought you should know that Delilah and Jackson have separated." I sat down carefully, processing this information. "When?" "Last week. Delilah moved in with a friend, and Jackson is... well, nobody knows where Jackson is. He disappeared with their remaining savings and left Delilah with all the debt." The pattern Amanda had described was completing itself. When Jackson could no longer exploit my generosity, he had apparently moved on to find new sources of financial support, abandoning Delilah to deal with the consequences of their shared irresponsibility. "How is Delilah handling it?" "Not well. She's working 2 jobs trying to pay off their credit cards, living in a studio apartment, driving a 10-year-old Honda because they repossessed the BMW." Rebecca paused. "She's learning what financial independence actually means, and it's not pretty. I'm sorry to hear she's struggling. Uncle Vincent, I need to ask you something, and I want you to feel free to say no. Delilah would like to see you. Not to ask for money or help or forgiveness, just to talk. The request hung between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I wanted to cross. After everything that had happened, did I want to reopen communication with my daughter? What would be the purpose of such a conversation? I think she wants to understand how things went so wrong, and maybe to say goodbye properly. She knows there's no going back to how things were, but she wants closure. Closure. After 6 years of increasing toxicity followed by legal battles and emergency evictions, perhaps we both needed to have one final conversation that wasn't driven by anger or desperation. Would you be willing to be present for such a conversation? I asked. Of course, I think that would be better for everyone. All right, but it happens here, in my house, on my terms. I'll arrange it. Saturday afternoon brought Delilah to my door for the first time since the eviction 6 weeks earlier. She looked different, thinner, older, wearing clothes that were clean but clearly second-hand. The designer wardrobe and manicured appearance were gone, replaced by the practical appearance of someone working multiple jobs to survive. Rebecca accompanied her as promised, providing a neutral presence for what we all knew would be a difficult conversation. I invited them into the living room, noting how Delilah's eyes moved around the space that had once been her domain. Everything was the same, but her relationship to it was completely different. "Dad, thank you for seeing me," she said quietly, settling into a chair rather than the couch where she used to sit with Jackson. "I know you didn't have to do this. How are you managing?" I asked, genuinely curious about her new circumstances. "It's hard. Really hard. I'm working at a restaurant during the day and cleaning offices at night. I've never been poor before, and I'm learning that everything is more difficult when you don't have money." "What happened with Jackson?" Delilah's face tightened with pain that seemed fresh and deep. "He left the day after he found out our credit cards were maxed out and we couldn't get approved for any new debt. Cleaned out our checking account and disappeared." "I'm sorry." "Are you?" Her question wasn't hostile, just curious. "I mean, you warned me about him years ago and I chose not to listen." I had warned her, early in their relationship, about Jackson's pattern of financial irresponsibility and entitled behavior. She had defended him then, accused me of being judgmental and unwilling to accept her choices. "I'm sorry you're in pain," I said carefully. "I'm not sorry that someone who was toxic to both of us is no longer in our lives." Delilah nodded, accepting this distinction. "Dad, I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. When did you stop loving me?" The question hit me like a physical blow. "Delilah, I never stopped loving you." "But you stopped liking me." The accuracy of that statement was painful to acknowledge. "Yes, I stopped liking who you became when you were with Jackson." "When did that happen?" I thought about it carefully, trying to pinpoint the exact moment when love and disappointment had hardened into something colder. "The first time you complained about something I had done for you instead of being grateful for it. I think it was about 3 years ago, when I paid for your vacation and you criticized the hotel I had chosen." Delilah winced. "I remember that. I thought I was just expressing a preference. You were complaining about a gift. That's when I realized you had stopped seeing my generosity as kindness and started seeing it as obligation. Jackson always said that parents owed their children support. Jackson was wrong about a lot of things. Parents choose to support their adult children. When that choice stops being appreciated, smart parents stop making it." Rebecca had been quiet during this exchange, but now she spoke up. "Delilah, tell him about the realization you had." Delilah looked at her hands, gathering courage for whatever she needed to say. "I was at work last week, the restaurant job, and this elderly man came in alone. He ordered just coffee and sat by himself for 2 hours reading a book. When he left, he gave me a $20 tip on a $3 order." She paused, her voice becoming emotional. I asked him why. and he said his daughter lived across the country, and he missed having family to spend time with. He said he liked supporting young people who were working hard to build their lives. I waited for her to continue, and I realized that should have been you. You should have been the elderly father who felt good about helping his daughter, who felt appreciated and loved for his generosity. Instead, Jackson and I turned you into someone who had to protect himself from his own family. The insight was accurate and devastating. I had wanted to be the generous father who felt joy in providing for his daughter's future. Instead, I had become someone who had to use legal action to protect himself from exploitation. What do you want from this conversation, Delilah? I want you to know that I understand what we destroyed. I want to apologize for choosing Jackson's attitudes over your feelings. And I want to say goodbye properly, because I know we can't go back to being father and daughter after what happened. Why can't we? She looked surprised by the question. Because I hurt you too badly. Because I chose cruelty over gratitude for 6 years. Because some things can't be forgiven. I studied my daughter's face, seeing echoes of the little girl who used to bring me dandelions from the yard. She was different now, humbled by consequences, educated by hardship, freed from Jackson's toxic influence. Delilah, forgiveness isn't about pretending the past didn't happen. It's about choosing not to let the past control the future. What does that mean? It means that while I can't forget what happened, and while I can't trust you the way I once did, I don't have to hate you forever. Hope flickered in her eyes. Does that mean we could try to build something new? Not the old relationship, but maybe something different? I considered the question carefully. The old relationship, the one based on unconditional generosity and assumed gratitude, was indeed dead. But perhaps something smaller, more cautious, could grow in its place. It means we could start very small and see what develops. Coffee once a month, phone calls on holidays, the kind of relationship that has to earn trust instead of assuming it. Delilah began to cry. But these weren't the manipulative tears I remembered from our final confrontations. These were tears of relief mixed with regret. I would like that, Dad. I would like to earn the right to be your daughter again. 6 months later, I was sitting in the same coffee shop where that generous stranger had tipped my daughter $20. Delilah sat across from me, wearing work clothes from her new job as a bookkeeper for a small accounting firm. Honest work that paid honest wages and taught her the value of money she earned herself. Our monthly coffee meetings had become a ritual that both of us approached carefully. No assumptions, no entitlement, no taking for granted. Just a father and daughter slowly learning to know each other again. I got promoted, she announced, stirring sugar into her coffee. Assistant bookkeeper to junior accountant. It comes with a small raise and health insurance. Congratulations, you've earned it. The pride in her voice was different from the entitlement I remembered. This was the satisfaction of someone who had worked for recognition rather than expected it as a birthright. I also finished paying off the last of the credit cards, she added. I'm officially debt-free for the first time in my adult life. How does that feel? Scary and liberating at the same time. Scary because I have no financial cushion, but liberating because I don't owe anyone anything. Including me, I noted. She had never asked me for money during her post-eviction struggles, had never suggested that I should help her recover from the consequences of her own choices. Any word from Jackson? Her expression darkened slightly. He called last month, actually. He's in Florida, apparently married to someone with money. He wanted me to sign papers saying I wouldn't pursue him for any of the joint debt he stuck me with. Did you? I signed them, not because I forgave him, but because I realized that staying angry at Jackson was just another way of letting him control my life. The insight impressed me. She had learned to distinguish between forgiveness and healthy self-protection, between letting go of anger and letting go of accountability. I've been thinking about Mom lately, she said quietly. What about her? About what she would think of who I became after she died. About whether she would be proud of who I'm becoming now. I thought about Margaret's funeral. about her final wishes for our family to take care of each other, about the insurance money she had hoped would bring us together rather than drive us apart. Your mother would be proud that you learned from your mistakes instead of just repeating them. Do you think she would forgive me for what I did to you? I think your mother would be proud that you're asking that question instead of assuming you deserved forgiveness automatically. We finished our coffee in comfortable silence, each of us processing 6 months of careful rebuilding. The relationship we were creating bore no resemblance to the one we had destroyed, but it was built on honesty and earned trust rather than assumptions and entitlement. Same time next month? Delilah asked as we prepared to leave. Same time next month, I confirmed. As I watched her walk away, to her modest apartment, her reliable job, her debt-free life, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, genuine pride in my daughter. Not pride in her achievements or possessions, but pride in her character, her growth, her willingness to become someone worth respecting. 1 year after the eviction, on the anniversary of the day I had asked for a glass of water and been told I wasn't worth basic human kindness, I made myself dinner in my kitchen and reflected on everything that had changed. The house felt like home again. Not because it was empty, but because it was filled with peace instead of toxicity, with contentment instead of resentment, with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had reclaimed his own life. Mrs. Patterson still stopped by twice a week, bringing neighborhood gossip and genuine friendship. Rebecca called monthly to check on me and share family news. Amanda had visited twice more, each time reinforcing my understanding that Jackson's toxicity had been a pattern, not an aberration. And Delilah, my daughter who had lost everything and was slowly earning it back through her own efforts, who had learned the difference between entitlement and gratitude, between demanding and asking, between taking and receiving. During our most recent coffee meeting, she had done something that surprised me. Without being asked, without making it a production, she had simply refilled my water glass when she noticed it was empty. A small gesture, insignificant to anyone watching, but to me, it represented something profound. My daughter had finally learned that love expresses itself through service, not demands. That family members take care of each other not because they have to, but because they want to. The water tasted sweet. As I finished my dinner and prepared for bed in my quiet house, I thought about the insurance money Margaret had left behind, intended to keep our family together. In a way, it had worked. Not in the way either of us had planned, but in the way that mattered most. It had taught us all what family really meant. Not unconditional support for unacceptable behavior, but conditional love earned through consistent kindness. Not obligation disguised as relationship, but genuine connection built on mutual respect. The house where Margaret and I had planned to grow old together had become the place where her daughter and I learned to grow up separately, then choose to grow closer together. Some gifts, I realized, are worth taking back in order to give them again properly. And sometimes, the most loving thing a parent can do is teach their child that love has limits, that generosity requires gratitude, and that family is not something you're entitled to. It's something you earn every day with every choice you make about how to treat the people who care about you. The next morning, I would wake up in my house, make coffee in my kitchen, and sit in my chair, surrounded by peace I had fought to reclaim and relationships I had learned to rebuild. But that night, I went to sleep grateful for the hardest lesson I had ever taught, and the most important one my daughter had ever learned. Sometimes love means saying no. Sometimes family means setting boundaries. And sometimes the most generous thing you can do is refuse to enable someone else's cruelty. In the end, it had never been about a glass of water. It had been about respect, gratitude, and the courage to demand both when they are withheld. If you enjoyed this story, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Stories of family conflict and reconciliation resonate with many of us who have struggled to balance love with accountability, generosity with self-respect. Remember, you are worth basic human kindness, even from the people you've helped the most.